Hello, all, and welcome to the 8th episode of Essence of Wonder. It's our birthday, 2 months in. Happy to have you here. Today, our special guests are David Brin, who is a world renowned author, a public intellectual, and in my personal view, helped shape modern thought on privacy and a lot of other things that he has done. But that's the one that talks to me specifically, of course. We have had occasion to be colleagues, but honestly, I'm just here as a fanboy. He's amazing, and I'm so happy to just have the opportunity to talk to him today. Afterwards, we're going to have on Tammy Coxen returning with our show corner with mixology, specifically around the Hugo Cocktail. We're also having the Best Professional Artist for the Hugos panel in association with ASFA, with thanks, of course, to Sara Felix. And the artists joining us today will be Tommy Arnold, Galen Dara, John Picacio, Yuko Shimizu, and Alyssa Winans. I'm Gadi Evron, and this is Essence of Wonder. Karen, it's so good to have you with me here today. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Gadi. How are you doing?
Well, I'm just excited, but not just about David and the artists. I'm excited about SpaceX. I mean, seriously, there is nothing that makes me more excited than SpaceX. And the only thing I could find to show you guys today is the 1958 Apollo mission cup. But I'm going to wave it around as much as I can because I'm so excited.
It's true. He's been talking about this for weeks.
I have. They all hate me by now. But and it's going to happen today. It's not, the mission is not going to be scrubbed. But with that said, it's really cool to have a writer who creates evocative images on the level of David Brin. And then at the same show, the Hugo artists, some of the best artists in the world and in the genre. And this kind of, as I was thinking about the show, brought up a thought. There seems to be a special connection between the visual and the written in science fiction and fantasy, almost something that is I'm in awe of, but can't necessarily understand.
Well, a lot of sci-fi and fantasy is actually quite visually stunning, even in the description, just because it's, it often involves things we've never seen. My native, if I have a native medium to read and write in, it's the written word, but the best paintings and visual art to me tell an entire story in a moment.
Thinking about that, I think the best example for me, now that you talk about it, is actually from a non-fiction book, A History of Risk. It's called Against the Gods. And there is a picture on the cover of a Rembrandt of the Sea of Galilee in a storm. And all the humans on board just fight to hold on to the boat and fight the storm and get to their destination. And it's just an amazing image that evoked an entire story in my brain. So I kind of follow that.
Yeah, there's this painting I have on my wall. It's of a dragon. It's the artist is Carolina Eid, and she does some D&D art. And what I love about this dragon is that it's recognizably a dragon, and dragons are featured prominently in fantasy, but it feels completely like it comes from a different heritage than the others I've seen. Like he seems like almost like a little undersea creature, more than a one that I've seen before. And a lot of her characters or trope art does feel really fresh and reimagined. I've actually tried very hard to find her. I knew her only from her Deviant art at one point, but I just, if anyone happens to know or be able to introduce me to her, I really just want to buy more of her art.
Always good to buy art. Another thing that I've been kind of harping on and then bringing you on board to harp on with me is resonance. Ever since I came back from the David Farland workshop, and when you, for example, instead of talking about it, when I open up an epic fantasy book, I can immediately read about dragons and kings and castles and the vastness of time, and I immediately feel at home. I feel welcome. I feel in Tolkien's world in a way. And I think in a way, fantasy, science fiction, there is a special resonance between what's written and the visual, which isn't necessarily found elsewhere.
I mean, it's not just the written and the visual, it's music, there's filk, there's movie. I mean, I think that this genre more, not that other genres don't, but more than those, tends to reimagine literally the same story between different genres, where it will be written first and then brought into a movie, into a comic, into an animated show. And we really get to see and feel the same story differently in different mediums.
As a dancer, I connect with that. When you look at the choreography, there is the movement, there is the space, there is the connection between dancers and the music. But in a way, one thing in choreography that blows my mind is how for every single beat in the music, the choreographer knows at the very least what they want you to feel, what emotion they want you to have in that very moment. And I find that absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, there are many definitions of art and what is art. The one that I've always kind of come back to is that art provokes a reaction. It's meant
It's going
to
to be
provoke a reaction.
12.
So that's just a little bit of a teaser for us with NASA. So you all know it's there, but we're gonna just keep teasing you until the launch actually happens, and it's gonna happen. Keep going though, Karen.
Yeah, I mean, art being at the end of the day about provoking a reaction in the viewer is kind of what, you know, it's something intentionally created, but it's, you know, it's supposed to invoke an emotion.
I remember in last week's show, this is not what you said, but kind of what I took away from it. As we were discussing with all these experts, societal issues, policy issues, countering fake news, you raised the point about if this evokes something in somebody, if this is a human emotion, even if it's created by fake news, we shouldn't necessarily immediately jump to just block it.
That wasn't exactly what I said. I still think we should block it. I think it was more of a question of like, can it be blocked when this sort of storytelling and, you know, convincing others through stories is very inherent, I think, to humans.
Well, you know, this brings me back to David Brin again. And when I think about the Uplift series, for example, I have images in my brain to this very day, whether it's in the first book where I remember the negotiations with the new species that was found on the planet, or in the second book where the human soldiers rise out of the water. And for me, that's when the book kind of came together. The gorillas taking the test to move on to the next tier. Just all these scenes just are art in my mind.
Yeah, we asked some of our friends on Facebook, you know, to suggest some scenes like this, and we got so many. And so instead of reading them all, I'll just say one of mine, which was in the book, the Practice Effect. There's this idea that in this sort of alternate reality, we get to items actually become refined by being used more. And there's this trance that you can go into. It's called the Felfash trance, where you can like items can like become more refined more quickly. And so the first time the main character goes into one, the thing that he's holding actually comes out like has been maxed out. It's like crystal now. And I kind of wanted to see that visually. It's such a clear image.
Well, you know, I think this is a good time to just say, whether it's for David coming up or for the artists panel, maybe they can help us understand this special resonance or special connection. But with that, let's just move on and say, hello, David. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I'm, of course, Karen. I'm flattered. I just got the rights back for the Practice Effect after 35 years.
Really?
Same publisher, and so as we speak, 4 of my critical pre-readers are going through the OCR version that my wife tidied up, and so we're going to do a new edition ourselves. And I got back 8 or 9 titles. Nobody else had so many books under their original contracts, one of them going back to 1978. But according to the Superman law, that's a revision of the Copyright Act that happened because Schuster and Siegel were ripped off by DC and never got anything for Superman. Because of the Superman law, you're allowed to take back the rights to any creative work 35 years after, no matter what the original contract said.
Wow.
That is so cool to hear. I'm so happy that copyright law is changing in that way. But we will have a lot of time to chat. Right now, I would like to just turn it over to you. And I think you're doing a reading for us today.
Yes, well, the wonderful thoughts that you two were talking about art made me realize that I really have to speak up once, even though I absolutely adore science fiction art. And you can see above my head here the wonderful, wonderful painting for the cover of Sundiver that was done by Jim Burns. And when you look at science fictional art, notice that most of the interesting things are in the lower right-hand corner. The artists complain about this restriction, but it's so that it can be a book cover. So you'll see this over and over again in science fiction art. Everything interesting is in the lower right-hand corner. Anyway, Jim Burns gave that to my wife and me as a wedding present, but I actually have the Star Tide Rising cover that helped to make my career. Nevertheless, having said that, and my admiration and kisses to all the Hugo nominees, your generation is so much more smart and brilliant than ours, and you need to take over our politics too, from us boomers. But having said that, I'm going to read a short passage from one of my 2 science fiction comedies. Now, this one was just basically circulated, and it's much more broad and much more har har snort snort, you know, milk coming out of my nose kind of humor. Whereas I have just published my much more subtle but still pun-rich first science fiction comedy novel called The Ancient Ones. And Daria and Gadi will make sure that there's a link underneath because it's interesting. The Amazon reviews are all 5s and 2s. So, and that's the way it is with humor. You know, either you really enjoy it and don't drink milk while you're reading it, or you just hate the lame humor and want me to die. So that speaks well of it. All right, I'm going to read to you a short section from Gorilla My Dreams, which is a spin-off from the Uplift series that is, shall we say, well, you can tell what kind of humor it is. Fierce convulsions rip through space, sending colorful incandescent. This is a space battle, by the way. This is a space battle to beat all space battles. There will be no space battles that will contend with this one. Fierce convulsions rip through space, sending colorful incandescent explosions spiraling impressively through vast reaches of highly stressed interstellar vacuum. Ships blew apart, actinically blinding any spectators foolish enough to be watching too closely. Antimatter space mines lurked in ambush, awaiting unsuspecting star cruisers, then detonating furiously with lots of malice. Psi bombs blasted waves of mind-bending sub-energy, causing their victims to go mad, endlessly humming show tunes they didn't even like. Combat surged and fluxed awe-inspiringly from long range to intimate proximity. Flotillas merged silently, meeting out beams and rays of deadly force, then drifting apart again, decimated. The aquatic flagship of the fish-like Guppies clan was sliced open, gutted, and fried. The battleship of the avian Tuitis was carved up neatly, separating the dry, bland officer white meat from the juicier, dark meat and giblets of the lower decks. Space behemoths met in high-velocity collisions that relativistically seemed to occur in slow motion as boarding parties of expertly trained, adamantine-clad Marines hurled themselves through gaping holes in white-hot armor plate. During one vicious 4-way melee, combat became a massive jumble, hand-to-hand, claw-to-fin, feather-to-nostril, where half of the casualties were self-inflicted by warriors no longer able to tell their own body parts from anybody else's. Meanwhile, below, on beleaguered Earth, multitudes fearfully watched the titanic struggle taking place overhead, and an entire generation of special effects designers gave up working for Hollywood, realizing at long last that their pallid celluloid art form could never, ever match the bold, powerful, towering descriptive imagery of the written word. So there.
Thank you for that, David. Appreciate it. That's pretty awesome.
Well, I was going to read to you from something that you can download directly from my website, davidbrin.com, if you go to stories. And that's called The Giving Plague. And it is my most topical work because it's about viruses. And it's about how they interact with us, how different kinds of parasites find different niches within us. And it's about an extremely unique kind of commensal relationship between a virus and us. But there's a lot of talk about this story online, but I guess I won't read that because I already used up my time on that.
Well, I'm sure we'll have another opportunity at some point, but that was straight and to the point. Like, I got so engaged and then you just stopped. How dare you do this to me, sir?
Well, it's, I'll see what I can do about self-publishing Gorilla My Dreams, but let us just say that The Ancient Ones is at least a little bit more subtle humor than that. There are many types of humor. I did want to comment on one thing that you were talking about, and that is the resonance that you felt with fantasy, with the visual imagery. And I do want to say that that resonance goes even deeper, because the biggest difference between fantasy and science fiction, in my opinion, has nothing to do with the furniture, with the science per se. After all, Anne McCaffrey's novels were, dragons set in a medieval setting, and she had whole long sequences with bards and all of that. I mean, who did dragons better than Anne McCaffrey? And yet when anybody called her a fantasy writer, she would be enraged. She would angrily say, I am a science fiction author. First off, the dragons had once been genetically engineered to do their job, but that's beside the point. The main point is that her people in her series of novels discover that they had once been interstellar colonists with starships and flush toilets and universities and women's rights. And when they discover this, they want all those things back. And it's that wanting of change that is the heresy that science fiction commits against the mother genre, which is fantasy. Because if you read the Iliad and the Odyssey, Gilgamesh, they're all in hierarchical societies in which the element of wonder is performed by a few demigods at the top. And spear carriers get at best to choose, as happens in that high-tech fantasy called Star Wars. The most a normal person can do is choose which side of demigods that you're willing to die for. So look, I've written fantasy. I have a screenplay out there for the Loom of Thessaly, in which the hero meets the fates. But the mother genre does have a tense relationship with its offspring, science fiction.
David,
because science fiction is about the probability of change.
That's a really interesting comparison. I've heard many different ways of splitting out fantasy and science fiction and categorizing them, hard or soft science fiction, where they're set, urban, high Middle Earth type settings. But it's a great point that often the change that a whole fantasy arc will make by the end is a relatively, a single change to a hierarchy that largely still exists.
That's exactly right. And I was on a panel recently discussing what ending you would have wanted for Game of Thrones. And the ending that I came up with was the Brothers Without Banners kills every single lord and lady on the entire continent except Jon Snow and maybe his sister, and they are sent north and they are allowed down once a year to open Parliament, and if they're around the next day, they are killed too.
You're almost as evil as George Martin. I gotta tell you, I heard this, I don't know if it's true, that he actually modeled all the different lords and ladies after Hollywood producers.
That may very well be, but of course we all know that it's the War of the Roses. If the Plantagenet heirs had access to magic and lots of types of poison. But the main thing is that those who think that science fiction is all about science, it was badly named. It should have been called speculative history. And the reason is obvious, actually, and that is that only 10% of science fiction authors are scientifically trained, as I am. Now, I bring a lot of science into my science fiction, but I don't think that's my main job. Just as prediction, even though I have a very high predictive score, especially, alas, in recent politics, nevertheless, that's not my main job. The main job of science fiction is to explore historical possibilities. And almost all science fiction authors are steeped in history. The great, horrible story of our clawing climb out of mud in the caves. There's nothing more interesting than this 3 steps forward, 4 steps back, 10 to the side story of our best ancestors, sometimes accomplishing some breakthrough while maintaining stupid traditions that they should have known better. This is a fantastic story, and so science fiction extends the story forward in time or does side experiments. And I think that's vastly better description of science fiction is speculative history.
It's an amazing description of it. We had several fantasy authors on recently for an urban fantasy panel, and one thing that we were asking a lot about was how does fantasy or urban fantasy specifically, you know, how is it about society and you know, social issues? And you know, at the end of the day, you're very right that it is more so about a current structure of society than the evolution over time.
And you were totally right, Karen, that even in stories that are gripping, and I much prefer, and we'll skip to SpaceX in 1 minute. Even though I deeply admire Tolkien and enjoy him, and I have an essay about that. If you put in my name and Tolkien, you'll find I'm deeply respectful, even though he is my opposition. But if I had been to the Battle of the Somme...
Wait. If you don't mind, what does it mean Tolkien is your opposition? Please tell us more, sir.
Yeah, well, if I had been at the Battle of the Somme watching the flower of my generation mowed down by tools of modernity, I might have turned against modernity too. So he came by it honestly. Whereas George Lucas is just a freaking ingrate. His horrible moralizings through that sock puppet, that evil green oven mitt, who never says one thing ever that's wise.
As soon as we get back from this launch, I just want to name a bunch of popular stories and ask what your ending would have been to them.
Well, I have a book called Star Wars on Trial, and I'm the prosecuting attorney, and I'll show you the wonderful cover I had.
I might be mean and ask you, for example, what did you think about something like The Never-Ending Story when Artix died? I will be mean with you, sir.
I actually like that because at least it interrogated fantasy. But it's time. So
on that note, we are going to switch over to the NASA launch, and we have a lovely person called Dragos who's in charge of that. Dragos, and we are all going to mute ourselves, and we're going to just watch. There is no real sound coming from that yet, but we should be able to focus on that in a second.
Stage 1 tanks pressing for flight.
T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA, go SpaceX, Godspeed, Bob and Doug.
America has launched. And so rises a new era of American spaceflight, and with it the ambitions of a new generation continuing the dream. 20 seconds into flight, stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
T plus 30 seconds into this historic mission. Flying crew on board Dragon and Falcon 9, and look at them go.
Falcon power telemetry nominal.
M1D throttle down.
We're throttling down to get ready for the period of maximum dynamic pressure. We're in the throttle bucket. Reports say all systems are go.
Vehicle is supersonic.
We've exceeded Mach 1 on the Falcon 9.
M1D throttle up.
We're throttling back up to full power as we're through max Q.
Copy 1 Bravo.
And we heard that 1 Bravo call out. That's just the second abort zone that they're in. They'll continue to be on this until the first stage has done its job and they switch over to the second. At this point, Bob and Doug pulling about 2.3 Gs, 2.3 times the Earth's gravity, already moving at over 1,500 miles per hour.
We've heard the call out for MVAC engine chill. That's getting the MVAC engine ready to light. That'll come at about 2:44 into flight. Right now, everything continuing to look good. Next major event coming up is going to be the triple. We'll have main engine cutoff of the 9 first stage engines, stage separation, and then ignition of the second stage engine to continue to carry astronauts into orbit. Coming up in about 20 seconds.
M1D throttle down.
We heard we're throttling down the Merlin engines on the first stage. And we have Miko.
Miko.
2 Alpha. Falcon stage separation confirmed.
Copy 2 Alpha.
MVAC ignition.
All right, we have stage separation confirmed. The first stage beginning its flight back. The second stage being powered by that single Merlin 1D vacuum engine has ignited and is now carrying Bob and Doug into orbit. So they're going to continue under the power of this second
Stage 2 propulsion is nominal.
Which will cut off at
I think
Seco,
at this
or second
stage we can
cut off
probably
about
come back
44
and mute,
seconds into today's flight. So a little over 5 minutes
NASA.
to go still on this.
And I am just extremely excited. I have tears coming down my eyes. I don't get excited by things. I've been through stuff and what's wrong and stuff. I've been in a startup. I've suffered a lot. Not to cry like I'm so sad, but rather the only thing that gets me excited, and I can't really explain why that is, to this degree, is when I watch something that has to do with space. I mean, just imagine, people often speak about their Apollo missions and how these people just went on top of all this explosive power, risking their lives and going to space. But this is a 21st century. I'm speechless. David, maybe you can take over and help me out here.
Well, I tear up too, but I think the thing that often makes me tear up the most is the privilege of living in a time in which we have, at least temporarily, stymied the worst aspects of human nature, and that is the tendency to have domination by feudalism. 6,000 years, 99% of our ancestors suffered horrible oppression by males who picked up metal implements, gathered in a gang, killed other men and took their women and wheat. And we're all descended from the harems of guys who pulled that off. So this helps explain male fantasies. You know, we all think inside that we deserve to have those harems. And to have a civilization that systematically sets up ways for citizens to behave, to do something, a new magic, a new and different attractor state. And this is my biggest complaint about fantasy, is that it plays very often to the resonance that you spoke of, the sense that we're at home in a feudal type society. But we get to identify as readers with characters who just happen to be at the top of that pyramid. And I can understand that. I feel it myself. I have to pay attention to such feelings if I'm going to be a good writer. But within science fiction, there's a fellow by the name of Orson Scott Card who has made a fantastic high art of manipulating those feelings. He's extremely good at it. I happen to find it deeply immoral and ungrateful to this great civilization, but I am extremely respectful for the skill with which he does it. And
would you mind saying more on the what you find problematic with it?
Well,
is it manipulation? Is it influence? Is it communication?
The demigod, the notion of demigods. There are no Orson Scott Card stories that I know of. Oh no, wait, there's one or two. Somebody pointed out that do not have demigod central characters and do not have as their lesson, forget institutions, forget building a society of honest institutions and professionals who hold each other accountable. That's not the path. We must return to obeisance to demigods. And what's brilliant about his book that is in every junior high school in America, propagandizing what I consider to be evil, is that he does not beat you with the superiority of Ender. Instead, he guilt trips you by making Ender soulful. Ender guilt trips himself about his own guilt in things that very clearly, Card made clear, were the fault of all the institutions and the democracies and all the bureaucrats and all the stupid citizens. And so you go through the book going, no, Ender, don't blame yourself. Here, take all the power. You're so soulful and good. Now that's trickery that takes an incredibly good writing to be able to pull that off.
I want to come in only to, in part, agree with you, but also in part defend, I guess, Orson Scott Card's stories, because for many years and as a kid, I think Ender's Game and its sequels and prequels were my favorite novel, or one of them. And as an adult, I shared them with my partner, who had exactly your reaction, and I was completely unprepared for the point of view. I'd read them as a child, I'd read them as an adult with very different perspectives. But the one thing, the one kernel in there that I want to pull out is on a very real level, I think that parts of these books did teach me empathy. In a way that I hadn't had. And it was I believe they're the piggies, the characters of the piggies, where they'd been treated as, and this is in either the second or the third of these books, where they, and you saw this with the buggers a bit as well, where a character or a system who had been treated entirely as the antagonists for almost an entire book. They were terrorists, they were attackers. You later come to see their point of view and understand it in a way where you realize, I have a really new angle with greater understanding of the exact same conflict.
Exactly. I think he's very good at that. And I think that what has happened with the American right is they find ways that do not affect their power to come across as good guys, while absolutely having this complete agenda that the fundamental lesson is give power to the aristocrats. Give power.
I would like to,
particularly a demigod. Now choose good, nice demigods. I mean, Luke.
Ideally smart demigods or powerful.
Luke is so much nicer than the Emperor. Yeah, sure. If I have to choose between them, I'll choose Luke. He'll have a beer with me. But I think we're getting carried away off your topic. I did want to mention that one of the best covers I ever had is the Wayne Barlow cover for the Uplift War, which I will send you by email so you can include it in your Lagniaps for people. But you mentioned showing a scene from the story, and this is the best depiction of a particular scene from one of my stories that I've ever had, and I'll send it to you. It's a wonderful Wayne Barlow cover for the Uplift War.
Thank you for that. I would like to actually turn it back to history in a way, leaving current politics aside. If you look at history, and not to invoke Asimov in vain, but future history.
Oh, by the way, let's mention that I completed Isaac Asimov's universe in a novel called Foundation's Triumph.
I wonder why I decided to mention that, because I appreciate you for that.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm kidding.
For anyone who didn't know.
I tied together all his loose ends, even from obscure titles like Pebble in the Sky.
That must have been insanely hard to do. But the reason why I bring it up, so looking at future history, looking at humanity, how much do you find these things tie in there?
Oh, very much so. I believe that, look, one of the things I do besides the NASA work is I'm deeply involved as a theoretician.
I'm going to cut you off rudely right now, sir. I'm sorry. You said NASA. Tell me more about NASA.
Oh, I'm involved with NASA's Innovative and Advanced Concepts program. I'm on the External Council of Advisors. I participate in critiquing the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 grantees that they give out grants for small grants that encourage the pre-development of ideas that are just this side of science fiction, that are just this side of barely plausible. And about 20% of them go on to become very useful things. And about 20% of them later on, we are deeply embarrassed that we ever gave them any money. And
could I ask a clarifying question? You mentioned, having a history in science and a background in science. Is this more in that capacity, or in the capacity of, does NASA actually involve, sci-fi writers as such?
Well, no, this is maybe 60% in my capacity as a scientist. I have my PhD from UCSD in space science. Also, I did my undergraduate at Caltech. I'm still engaged in some research, but civilization clearly was willing to pay me more and give me more podcasts or whatever for being a blatherer and storyteller, which was my gift in my family going back 5 generations. I escaped into science because I wanted something that was pure and honest. Now, science isn't pure, but it has self-contained mechanisms, especially the fact that scientists are so competitive, the most competitive humans that our species ever made. And that is the ultimate refutation of the right wing's relentless, vicious campaign against science.
And moving back to the future history thing on this point, this particular point, I cut you off, and I think like in your books, we should probably pull on that thread.
And let's do that, the future history thing. The point is that what I was about to say is that I'm also involved in the theory of SETI and the Fermi paradox. Why is it that we have not seen signs of the vast, extensive human civilization that we intend to create out there? Ideally, with the morality that has been informed by Star Trek, and that is trying to be good. And I portray that in my comedy, The Ancient Ones. The point is that the reasons why we don't see anybody make up a huge conversation. And there are about 100 hypotheses. And out of those 100 hypotheses, I have a top 5. I refuse to say there's just one because we don't have enough data. Number 1, in my opinion, is that our type of intelligence is very, very rare, that we're an incredible fluke. Which means, which is actually very hopeful, because it means we'll find a lot of pre-sapient civilizations out there, but nobody who could boss us around. So we'll be able to be the ancient ones. We'll be able to be the helpers. But nobody's screwed up the galaxy. That's our job. I hope not. In any event, number 3 on my list is feudalism, because it was a huge attractor state in 99% of human societies on 6 continents for the last 6,000 years. And we only had rare times when we escaped from it by discovering another attractor state called citizenship. And we saw it in Periclean Athens. Read the funeral oration of Pericles in Thucydides, and you'll see a modern mind, like Ben Franklin, talking about how holding each other accountable is how we get past our delusions. Whereas in feudalism, you have this pyramid of power, and the delusions self-reinforce, and the kings and the priests and the lords kill anybody who tries to apply the cleansing light of transparency and criticism. And certainly they prevent their wives from criticizing them, which is the greatest source of wisdom in all of human history. Well, until we developed female prime ministers. New Zealand's Ardern should be president of Earth.
Matriarchies work quite well. I agree.
As far as I'm concerned, and Angela Merkel can be prime minister. As far as I'm concerned, clean us up for 20 years. Then relax a few minutes.
So pulling back to what you're saying, I would actually like to go to one of your short stories, which picks a maybe different approach here, which is the crystal spheres.
Well, the crystal spheres is a hypothetical excuse for the Fermi paradox that is, well, shall we say, way down or in the lower 90s as far as likelihood. It's more a piece of art. And it's basically posits that the galaxy has not been settled because you can escape from your own solar system. But unless somebody has ever broken the sphere from the inside, no star system is available to you. You can't get in. And so that's, well, what can I say? That one won the Hugo Award.
It did, and it's also been in so many anthologies as well. It felt kind of like one of the best, if not explicit, I was just in, sometimes you read a story and there's a feeling that comes across, and it was a combination of wholesome and awe together about science, about exploration, about loneliness in the universe, but at the same time, without ever saying anything, you kind of say, this is the best reason I've ever seen to, without ever saying this explicitly, there is a God that we're kind of being taken care of until we're ready or wanting to go out there.
Well, you know, theological aspects of our life is something that definitely colors a large number of my stories. The question of whether or not there's more to what we see. I believe in impudence. I believe in citizenship. That's the basic notion of our civilization. We're the ones who restored the Periclean experiment. And there's no question that Periclean Athens, Florence, and we in our 250-year experiment, we're the ones who we accomplished so much more than any of these feudalisms. Oh, I see they stuck the landing. They stuck the landing on the barge.
Boom.
So that's
nice.
That's nice. That's always a nice little addendum to every SpaceX launch.
I was actually messaging my best friend while this was launching because she'd worked at SpaceX for a while, and just thinking about the incredible responsibility as an engineer of humans strapping themselves to what you've worked on, and hoping to God it doesn't kill them. I don't know. It's just that was what had me teary-eyed watching that, was just the responsibility of things you make and people trusting them, and like how beautiful that is.
Absolutely. And of course that is what causes Gadi to tear up, is the boldness of a civilization that is also competent. And
yes.
we are being taught zero-sum thinking, which was applicable in most human civilizations, but the fundamental premise of our civilization is what's called the positive sum game. You can be many, you can be more than one thing. This is what, when I give commencement addresses or I have advice, if you have a high school senior who's heading off to college, look up my advice to before you go to college. You can be more than one thing. All of the great scientists I've known had artistic hobbies that they performed at almost a professional level. I was told that I saw Einstein play the violin when I was 4. I have no memory of it. Probably traumatized me. But the point is, you know, when I was at Caltech, when I was at UCSD, I saw that it was true. You can be more than one thing.
I belong to a Burning Man camp of scientists. Most of us hail from MIT or Caltech. It's a bunch of art by mathematicians. I completely agree. I've never known almost a serious scientific person who didn't have an art problem somewhere. It's all very audacious dreaming.
and the point is that by understanding what the positive sum game means, and I recommend, in fact, there's nothing a citizen needs more than to have that concept. to look and see. Sometimes you have to defeat your enemy. And I'm afraid we're in one of those phases right now. We're in what I call phase 8 of the American Civil War. Nevertheless, when you defeat your enemy, you have to be like Abraham Lincoln. You have to look charity for all, malice toward none. You have to try to see if it's possible to have a positive sum, a win-win outcome out of it. And let me just cite, I cited before my new sci-fi comedy, The Ancient Ones, but this is my book, Polemical Judo, that I just came out with, that talks about ways in which we can try to it talks about how we're in phase 8 of the American Civil War, and ways that we can try to find positive sum paths out of this terrible mess we're in.
I love that and look forward to reading it. I do want to revisit something that we had mentioned before the launch, which is your version of endings to other people's famous stories. So we mentioned Ender's Game already. We mentioned Orson Scott Card's arc. I was thinking we could either do that one, or maybe we could do Harry Potter. Since you.
Harry Potter, I highly recommend Eliezer Yudkowsky's wonderful novel, Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality.
Oh, I've read it. It's
it's truly terrific. And of course, Rowling's lawyers went to Yudkowsky and said, "You don't get one nickel, but have fun. Fan art is a fine thing." I recommend Prelude to Axanar, A-X-A-N-A-R. That's the Star Trek group that it got so professional that Paramount said, okay, there's a point beyond which we cannot let you go. You cannot make full motion pictures for profit. But you should see Prelude to Axanar. It's really, really good. So Yudkowsky ended by saying, write your own ending to my novel. And the one I wrote was, it's bloody obvious that in the Harry Potter universe, you're in somebody's simulation, somebody's holodeck. I mean, there are just too many aspects to the Harry Potter world that are just too trite, like faux Latin with the spells, when these are supposed to go back 20,000 years to Atlantis. They did not speak Latin in Atlantis. But you see, that's me. I poke at the story.
I was going to say, as somebody who dabbles in writing, that you're the reader I'm terrified of.
Well, the greatest storyteller I ever knew was Poul Anderson. And he would sacrifice a week's work to fix someone else's story arc, because the story was sacred to him. I'm not that bad, but I do that. I have definitely helped to people's story arcs, because once I see their story, I am just desperate to get it off the resuscitator.
And it's a very high compliment. If you see a story with no redeeming value, I imagine you're not so moved.
This is why when I teach writing, I have a bunch of people can go to my website, look for my advice essays and YouTubes. But one of the top pieces of advice I teach when I give writing seminars is your first novel should be a murder mystery. Even if you want to write romance, if you want to write fantasy, if you want to write sci-fi, all of those have traits that let you hide whether or not you succeeded at the arc. But in a murder mystery, when you get to the climax, it actually should be a triple climax, because you got to have a gotcha in there. But when you get to the climax and you find out who done it, there are 3 ways the reader can respond with, huh? Where the hell did that come from? That's not satisfying. Of course. That's not satisfying either. No, you want a horrified moment of self-loathing when the reader goes, of course! Oh, I'm so stupid! If you're the writer, you're a sadist. And you want to cater to the reader's masochism. And if you do, and they hate you, they will buy your next book.
And that's what matters at the end of the day.
My fans say that about me.
I don't doubt it. So I would actually like to turn to one of the things I trust you most on, and that is biology. CRISPR, genetics, the future of humanity. Would you mind saying a little bit about your opinion and thoughts around that?
Well, I've given a lot of talks about AI, and I'm ticked off at all the AI philosophers because they miss the point completely. First, how did we become intelligent? We did it by raising fetuses. They spill from the womb at 9 months, but they're fetuses until maybe age 25. You can guess what age my kids are. And
either 24 or 26.
Yeah, this extended childhood is the reason we live so long. We're the Methuselahs of mammals. And that's why it's going to be hard to increase our lifespan. I'm not saying we won't, but all the low-hanging fruit was plucked in order for us to get 80 years. So it may be necessary for an AI to physically engage with the world for years in order to become fully intelligent, in which case we'll have an opportunity to raise them fostered in our homes as our children. And some sci-fi has talked about that. Yes, I will sing. And the other aspect is that the way in which you keep AI from becoming Terminator, Skynet, whatever, Matrix, is the way we prevented other kinds of aristocracies from bullying us. And that is the culture. You have a lot of AIs and you have a flat, free, fair, transparent culture, and the AIs, no matter how smart they are, they will be in competition and protect us by tattling on each other. That's how we got the freedom we do have. It's the only method that ever worked, and it's the only method that can work. Pericles and Benjamin Franklin talked about it, and none of the AI philosophers are talking about it. And it's the only thing that can work. And with that, I am required by Daria, who terrifies me.
As she should, sir, as she should.
Absolutely. She's winsome, sweet, gorgeous, and I would not want to cross her. Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that about me.
I am going to leave you all with a song. Now, this is something that I memorized half of it, hearing it once in 1979 during an NPR show. Yes, there was NPR back in the caves, called Unpacking the 80s. And it projected into the 80s, around 1986 or 7, we would be coughing and hacking with a virus. And this is a lounge song being sung by the guy at the piano to try to cheer people up, or at least give them some perspective. Now, about half of the verses I made up because I couldn't remember the whole thing. And I have asked for years for people to help me Google to find this guy named Jesse or something or other. And I haven't had any success. So much for this being the age of finding everything. It's called It's a Virus.
Do our best to help.
It's called It's a Virus. Back in the Pleistocene, when we were still marine, a virus launched a quest to be the perfect guest and rearranged our genes. So to this very day, whether you grok or pray, all your inheritors count on those visitors and what they make you pay. It's a virus, it inspired us to rise above the mud. It's a virus, it's desirous of your very flesh and blood. Now I know your body's burning, but don't give up the ghost. Tiny viruses are turning you into the perfect host. Though you may curse microbes who make you blow your nose, Evolution bends to what the virus sends, making us recompose. Though when you least expect, you may be struck down next. Thank the virus, he put us in misery, but then he gave us sex. It's a virus, it inspired us to rise above the mud. It's a virus, it's desirous of your very flesh and blood. Now I know your body's burning, but don't give up the ghost. Tiny viruses are turning you into the perfect host.
Yay! That was amazing.
Oh, that is such a
Hang
good.
in there, and this civilization is worth fighting for.
David, I must admit, you've always been one of my favorite people. I'm lying, by the way. No, I'm kidding. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. I'll share with our audience that you're actually one of the people who wanted to help us start. It took a little bit of time for us to organize this, but you stepped up to help us and to help people in isolation. You're a great guy, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
I try to make up for the bad things, because you never know, there may be purgatory. There's a bunch of TV shows now about afterlife. Why suddenly now? Anyway, you guys do great.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you next time.